Coming out of victim mentality was the biggest paradigm shift of my life, and I have had many. I had no idea that I was reacting to life rather than acting on it. So what does all this mean? It means that instead of being thoughtful, giving conscious consideration to what's going on around us and making conscious decisions, that we're instead just reacting based out of habit or patterns from the past. The reason that this is such an important shift for people in recovery to make is that most of us have been living in fight or flight mode our entire lives, or numbing to try to get out of it. So we do things based on what we've always done before, which is not necessarily what this current situation calls for. What we've always done is often based on patterns we developed in childhood. Now, those patterns may have been adaptive at the time, but they're no longer serving us as grown people. Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. If you're tired of feeling fragmented and overwhelmed, this podcast is your guide to creating a life of wholeness, authenticity, and healthy boundaries. I'm a woman in recovery who is also a boundaries coach and speaker. I share raw and honest insights from my own journey and the principles of 12-step recovery. Discover how to set boundaries without guilt or shame, overcome people-pleasing tendencies, manage your emotions effectively, cultivate a stronger sense of self, and build healthier relationships. My approach is raw, honest, and sometimes a little bit, a lot sweary. I'm an avid beachcomber and a formerly closeted fan of the Hallmark Channel, especially Christmas movies. I wear fingerless gloves almost all year round because my hands are always cold, and I love taking pictures of license plates with my initials BN on them. I don't speak for or endorse any particular 12-step program of recovery. Though I'm a huge fan of 12-step recovery and a member of two such fellowships, I cannot speak for them. If you're ready for real talk and practical tools for transformation, keep listening. This is episode 305, From Reactor to Responder: How to Break Free from Old Patterns. I've been wanting to do an episode on how to go from being a reactor to an actor, that is, being proactive instead of reactive. And last week I heard someone say, do you want to be a first reactor or do you want to be a first responder? And I was like, ooh, I'm totally going to steal that expression. So I'm using that expression as the impetus to finally do an episode on this topic. Now, one of the promises in my ACA program is that we go from being a reactor to an actor in our life. And some people mistakenly think actor means that you're faking things. And they're like, wait, I've been acting and pretending my whole life. I don't want to be an actor. I want to be a real person. That's not what being an actor means in this context. It means being proactive in your life rather than reactive to it and the things that are happening in your life. In my OA program, we say we learn to act on life rather than reacting to it. As I went along in my recovery, the more I realized this is a description of coming out of victim mentality. You may know that I have quite a number of episodes on victim mentality because for me, coming out of victim mentality was the biggest paradigm shift of my life, and I have had many. I had no idea that I was reacting to life rather than acting on it. So what does all this mean? It means that instead of being thoughtful, giving conscious consideration to what's going on around us and making conscious decisions, that we're instead just reacting based out of habit or patterns from the past. The reason that this is such an important shift for people in recovery to make is that most of us have been living in fight or flight mode our entire lives, or numbing to try to get out of it. So we do things based on what we've always done before, which is not necessarily what this current situation calls for. What we've always done is often based on patterns we developed in childhood. Now, those patterns may have been adaptive at the time, but they're no longer serving us as grown people. That means we want to make the shift where we can make decisions about how we want to live our lives in a proactive manner, using the frontal lobe of our brains where our higher order thinking takes place, rather than our lizard brain, which is the reactive part. That's the part that's active when we're in fight or flight mode. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, that's great, Barb. How do we do that? Well, first of all, like with any issue, awareness is required before changes can be made. If you don't know something's an issue, then you can't address it. So you need to be aware, I'm reacting, I'm not responding. And then number 2, decide I no longer want to be a reactor. I want to be an actor. I want to proactively live my life on purpose. Next, once we've made the decision, we have to figure out, how do you do that? It's impossible to make that shift without learning how to pause. You've probably heard a bunch of times before that pausing is my number 1 tool of recovery and has been since the very beginning. I put a link in the show notes to my pausing episode so you can learn how to do that if you don't know. But just so you do know, it is really, really difficult. At least it was for me to learn how to pause. It's definitely not easy to learn how to do, because if it was, we'd all be doing it and we'd be proactively living instead of reactively living. But it is a skill, which means you can learn it. And I don't care how old you are. What that does for us is it allows us to make choices. When we're reactive, we're acting like we don't have choices. It's almost like we're acting by instinct, except for that it's not born instinct. It's almost like instinct that's been trained into us based on the fact that we have been in fight or flight mode most of our lives. So we're trying to retrain ourselves out of that. So pausing is key. You also need to do some thinking about how you want your life to be. I had no fucking idea how negative I was and how much chaos I had in my life until I got in recovery. This is despite the evidence that there was chaos, because I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s. I smoked bales of weed and was surrounded by chaos in so many ways. And yet I thought, oh, I'm a really positive person. But there I was, blaming people for all kinds of stuff, complaining about things, ruminating about the past, catastrophizing about the future. So I had all kinds of mental negativity in my head, and I was creating negativity by complaining and blaming and all the other kinds of stuff. Now, I swear I just didn't even know that stuff was going on. So being aware that it doesn't have to be that way is imperative. Here's an example. What I learned growing up was that if there is traffic on the highway, you get pissed off. That is, traffic equals being pissed off. Both of my parents got pissed off in traffic on the highway. I didn't know that it was an option to not get pissed off in traffic. Now, truth be told, I did ride in cars with other people who didn't get upset. And I remember thinking, what the fuck is the matter with these people? Like, how do they do that? It seemed weird and like an anomaly to me. But I came to understand, wait, I don't have to get upset about everyday things like this. It used to be that if I knocked over a glass and spilled it and it broke, I would be like, Jesus Christ. And I would be all upset while I was cleaning it up and thinking about how pissed off I was that this happened to me and that it was delaying me. But now, if something like that happens, I say something like, oh, goodness. And then I just clean it up. And sometimes I'm even grateful that nobody got hurt. Those were just not options for me before I got into recovery, because it was modeled for me that you break something, it equals that you react to it in a really pissed off and annoyed way. In other words, it didn't feel like I had a choice. That's why I say it wasn't an option. When you're reactive, you don't perceive that you have choices, which is a hallmark of victim mentality. When you're proactive, you actively make choices. So you probably heard me talk about the grand epiphany I had in my car when I was in a traffic jam a couple of months into recovery. All of a sudden, in this traffic jam, the third time I went to slam on the brakes, I had this thought, I need to leave space between cars. And I was like, whoa, that's my recovery program. It's working. It's working. That's my program. I'm the problem. My thinking is the problem. And when I say I'm the problem, I mean that in a very empowering way, not in a self-deprecating way. Because if I'm the problem, then I get to be the solution. And if that is not empowering, I don't know what is. In other words, I get to be the solution to the problems of my life instead of waiting around for some miracle to happen or people to change or traffic to go away. I realized that I was reacting to traffic every single time I got on the highway because I had this deeply subconscious belief about traffic equals being pissed off. So I just reacted the way I always had. Now, after that grand epiphany, things changed. The very next time I got in the car, I was a completely different driver. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I have choices here. And highways were built for traffic. So it's supposed to be this way. There's supposed to be lots of cars on the highway. A client just said this to me this morning. You're not in traffic. You are traffic. So I can expect it to be this way. So now if someone won't let me merge onto the highway, I don't have to lose my shit about it. I can just slow down and wait until they go past so I can merge. Or if someone goes to pull out in front of me, instead of losing my shit and slamming on my brakes and laying on the horn at them, I can slow down, I can move over, I can speed up, whatever I need to do to avoid an accident and stay calm and respond to the situation rather than react to the situation out of the patterns that were programmed into me in my childhood. Now, of course, this takes time to do. This is a learning process. First, you have to be aware that you're an actor, not a reactor. Then you have to decide you'd rather be proactive than reactive. Then you've got to learn to pause and then take some time to decide how you want to live your life. Now, this is going to take some time if you've never lived proactively before, and there will be a bit of a learning curve on this. Just because you make some decisions of how you want to live your life, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it for yourself in the beginning. So this is making me think about when I am doing trainings and working with clients and teaching them how to keep the focus on themselves. One of the first things I have them do is ask yourself, what do I want or need here? Now, I never did that. And so I'll tell you, when you first start asking that, you're probably not going to know. But if you knew, you wouldn't need to ask that question. So that makes sense. But you still want to keep asking yourself. And then eventually you're going to start to come up with some answers about what you want or need in this situation. Then once you come up with some answers, you're probably not going to be able to give them to yourself because you've probably never given anything to yourself before. So you're still going to keep doing it because eventually you're going to give it to yourself. It's the same thing with asking yourself, how do I want to live my life? If you've only been living your life by what was prescribed to you by your family or your culture, whether that culture means your ethnic group or some other culture such as the military or being a public servant, there are cultures in which you're told this is how you should be. And maybe when you start making some actual choices, you might decide, oh, I actually do want to choose those things that my culture prescribed for me. But if it was handed down to you and you didn't really give any thought to it, maybe instead you realize, wait, I don't want to do that. You get to decide how you want to live. Then it's going to take you some time to actually allow yourself to know what that is. And then once you do know what that is, you'll start taking some action so you can do some research to get feedback for yourself about whether this choice really fits you or not. Let's say that you want to start taking salsa lessons, and maybe you start taking salsa lessons. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe I waited this long. This is really amazing. Or alternatively, you start taking salsa lessons. You're like, oh my God, I hate this. It's way too hard. I'd rather watch people dance. either way, you've gotten feedback, so you know how to proceed. So in the second scenario, you realize, I guess I don't want to be a salsa dancer. Instead, maybe I could go to the competitions and watch people, or maybe I can volunteer there or something like that, so I can be part of the culture of salsa dancing without having to be one of the actual dancers. So you have to take action to get some feedback for yourself, to determine for yourself, how does that feel? It's the same with setting healthy boundaries. You experiment, you make educated guesses about what you think your boundary is, then you act on that, and you see how it feels. And if it feels great, then you're like, yeah, this is my boundary. But if you feel like, that wasn't quite right, maybe you need to tighten it up a little or loosen it up a little bit. But there needs to be some experimenting. If you want to go from being a reactive person to being a proactive person, that is, if you want to be a first responder rather than the first reactor in your life, you have to become aware that this is your pattern, then decide to change it, then learn to pause, then decide how you want to live your life, and then experiment by taking action to get feedback about whether those actions feel like the right ones or not. My ideal clients are professional women who say yes when they really want to say no, and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others. What I've found is that most professional women feel overwhelmed. You keep giving in to others and take on too much. You're afraid of disappointing others or being seen as selfish, so you don't say no. When you even think of setting boundaries, you get flooded with guilt and shame. The reality is that things will never improve until you stop putting everyone else first. To get the life and relationships you want, you have to stop ignoring yourself and start focusing internally. If this sounds like you, please sign up for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries call with me at barbchat.net. If you like this podcast, and I'm guessing you did because you're still listening, you will also love my weekly newsletter, Friday Fragments, which has short essays similar to the podcast. You can check it out at fridayfragments.news. That's fridayfragments.news. If you haven't already subscribed to my podcast on your favorite podcast outlet, please do that. It helps carry the message to more people. I started this podcast because there was so much wisdom in recovery that just wasn't making its way out into the world. So I want as many people as possible to hear it. I'd also love it if you'd leave a 5-star rating or a review, which you can do on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find it so they can get the benefits that you've gotten from listening. If someone in particular came to mind when you listen to this episode, please share it with them. And my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. Please DM me there. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. I run private and group coaching programs on building healthy boundaries. Whether you need help with boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, I can help. Head on over to barbchat.net where you can get on my calendar for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries consultation. I also do short-term situational coaching to help people make it through specific situations they're going through, such as divorce, empty nesting, preparing for retirement, or any phase where their identity is shifting. Regardless of the type of coaching, my ideal client is someone who is ripe for change. If that's you, I'd love to work with you. My goal with all my work is to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. Remember, it's never too late to recover. No one is beyond hope, and healing is possible. Thanks for listening.